The harder the conflict, the greater the triumph.
A fiercest serpent may be overcome by a swarm of ants.
Lead me, follow me, or get out of my way. Age wrinkles the body, quitting wrinkles the soul.
Battle buddies.
Battle buddies.
I found a new community that I really enjoy, and that is Southern Woodburner tutorials on YouTube, which is a new thing I've been finding. And they're like, "Hey, this is Crystal from Arkansas. Thanks for joining my channel. If smash that subscribe button if you can. It does a lot for me. Today we're gonna go over how to shade wolves on wood, and really pleasant.
That sounds relaxing.
It was really nice.
That sounds lovely.
It was a really good tutorial on how to shade wolves' fur on wood burning.
Yeah, dude, there's way worse things that you could be ingesting on the internet. That's a lovely little pocket you got there. I'm trying to think of some stuff that I've watched where I'm like, you know what? This is great. Oh, here's one. When during COVID, there was a dude who, him and his buddy just took cameras and started going around the country to movie theaters that had to officially close and were essentially abandoned throughout the country because they were like, oh, these are like the dollar movie theaters where we're showing like the reels that are these movies are about to come out on DVD or Blu-ray or whatever the fuck. And it was so magical to see all these abandoned movie theaters. It was very calming and relaxing to watch.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I used to be a projectionist.
Were you?
Yeah.
Dude, so I used to work at the movie theater, and you have projectionist vibes.
Yeah.
And I mean that, I don't mean that pejoratively. That's a compliment.
Yeah, it was fun, because I learned a lot at 18 about the world is more complicated than I thought and a lot shadier than I thought, because I would let my managers sneak onto the roof from my room to go get high, which was cool because then they let me do whatever I wanted because I let them do this act. And then they would give us, for doing that, free movie tickets, passes.
Right.
And then on Thursdays when we get our new reels, we would go over to the best pizza place that we knew of in Long Beach, and we would trade with one of the pizza makers movie ticket passes for free pizza.
Bro, classic barter system. That's what I'm talking about.
And then we'd make movies all night, and then we'd watch them all 3 a.m. eating the pizza. And it was great. It was 2 years. It was awesome.
Dude, there's nothing better than free. If you are a movie fan, there's nothing better than free movie tickets.
Yeah. Yeah, so anyway, I've been listening to podcasts on ancient Greek music today, really to gear up.
These are people who talk about ancient Greek music.
They were talking specifically, and then they brought up Thermopylae, which was dope. And
Hit me.
They're like, that flute thing in 300?
Yeah.
This guy is a huge nerd, just was singing ancient Greek hymns, and it was awesome.
Wow.
And then he's like, that was the only thing the movie 300 got right.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, that's dope.
He's like, they do it.
The flying V flute?
Yeah, it has 2 reeds, and the way he described it, which I stopped listening after he said the first part because that was the part that was interesting. He's like, think of it like a saxophone. I was like, yes, I don't need to hear the rest of it. It's a dude having a sax solo, but he gets to play 2 of them at the same time. And he's just thinks he's this cool jazz guy, for sure.
That's dope.
Yeah.
I'm wondering I would really. Oh, so you listened to some of it, yeah?
Yes.
Can you give me a little what would you say it doesn't sound like anything? It's pretty original.
No, well, okay. So the other thing that I feel stupid that I didn't catch it, but so the Spartans are part of one of the the ethnic groups of the Dorians, right? And that becomes important for Thermopylae, and the Dorian scale is a scale in music theory. And I didn't put it together.
Is that's legit?
He's like, yeah, so they would use the Dorian scale. And I was like, God damn it.
Of course they did.
Okay. Yeah, that's easy. I should have got that one immediately when I read the word Dorian.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
When you say Dorian, I think of the Dory, which is what the spear is called.
Right.
That's where my mind goes.
No, yeah, the Dorian scale. So it just sounds like just straight music, like pretty folksy.
Right, so it's kind of like jolly toe tapping kind of stuff.
Yeah, so I think I was trying to listen to. It's hard because a lot of the stuff that survived is more like religious.
Yeah.
Like they're like Delphi things.
Yeah.
Or they're like some hymn to a god, and so, or they're an epitaph, like they're part of, like the coolest one that he had, and it was like super somber and interesting, and it was like, it boiled down to YOLO, like you only live once,
Dope.
which was awesome. And it was just like this sad thing that someone carved on this guy's grave, and so it was like, that's dope.
That's metal.
That's
That's
pretty
cool. Okay, well, I think that makes sense because I go into it in I think day 3. I talk about Leonidas like leading folks into like a hymn. So I think they did sing hymns like in marching in battle and things like this.
Oh yeah. Well, so that was the part that he was talking about that I thought was interesting, that they say like in the literature that they essentially play that while they're going into battle.
Yeah.
And he's like not convinced, but he's like a huge nerd. So I was like, you don't know it. Like people need to get pumped up. Like people need to get amped.
Yeah.
So I think they would. But the other part that I found was interesting is that instrument, that double flute with 2 reeds, which I don't know how they do that with their mouth, but that instrument is like a Spartan instrument that Spartans like, but like the Athenians thought that was like a weak instrument because their god, Athena, didn't like it. And so they would only play like a lyre or something like that. And then they're all made with like dead animals, and like that becomes like a huge issue, is like they have to like kill turtles so that they can like use the shell to like make the back of their guitars, and like it's awesome.
Can you imagine, bro, if you were like, dude, check out this wicked guitar? So I was like, my God doesn't like that instrument.
My
So
dad doesn't let me listen to that music
sorry.
anymore. I can't watch The Simpsons.
Right, my God's not into that.
Oh my god. I remember 3rd grade. Like, hey man, you want to come over and watch Pokemon? I can't watch Pokemon because of God.
Because of God. Hey man, I was kind of one of those kids. Yeah. My mom and dad did not let me re-watch Harry Potter or read like initially.
Yeah.
And then my dad was like, "Let's just let him read books. Like, let's cut our losses here. I want him to read something."
Well, it's like, do I want Harry Potter to be the thing that my kid rebels against me and obsesses over? Like, do I want them?
I'm in the garage reading Harry Potter. Is he smoking pot out there? No, he's reading Worse, he's reading Harry Potter.
Way worse.
What else? Yeah, my mom was not really into the movie Hercules, like the cartoon one, because of Hades and stuff. Like, I don't know, man. Just stupid shit. Ooh, this is to caveat the Pokemon thing. Like, I was allowed to watch Pokemon, that's fine. But I remember my parents got rid of X-Men cards. This is like mid-90s shit.
Yeah, that's whack.
Yeah, and it was because somebody at church told them to do that. I should have just played the flute. Played the double flute. Then their God would have loved me. Any thoughts on day 1 before we go into this epicness of day 2 and 3 and conclude our Battle of Thermopylae? Anything we need to know? They're sound asleep. So day 1, I would say, is a win for the Spartans.
Day 1, they just like, they wreck it. Like, they're just so good. And I think for like listeners, the big personal, what I've gathered is like there's a big personal decision you have to make as the person viewing this battle, and that is this an act of desperation? And they're getting stuck, and they're like, well, we're all gonna die anyway. Life is only a short thing. Or is this like, we have really thought through this chessboard and have abstracted out like this crazy concept that we're going to hit supply lines and we're going to do a battle of attrition? Because I think that both sides have merit, but you need to decide one, because like that's how you view it.
It's good. That's a wonderful question. We're definitely going to get into that within these next 2 days, because certain things are going to come up where it's like,
you got to decide.
Well, there's some ambiguity. There's definitely some ambiguity to it, where it's, you don't necessarily, like you were saying in day 1, where like think there can be both There can be some duality to this. But at the end of the day, yes, day one goes Spartans 1, Persians 0. I say.
I was trying to think of it through like a chessboard, and it's like a pawn chain is when you have, because pawns attack diagonally, and so if you lay all your pawns out diagonally and form like a V or an upside down V, more like a mountain, then you create a pawn chain, and your opponent essentially can't attack your front piece because they will get murdered through the exchange from all of the supporting pieces.
Understood.
So their only way to beat a pawn chain is to go all the way to the back of the line. And I was thinking about it, like the best strategy that I have against pawn chains is using my knights and doing flanks, like, and just using my L's. And I think essentially that's what the Persians just assumed they were going to be able to do against this phalanx, because it works really well in the past. And all of a sudden Thermopylae shows up and the Spartans are like, we thought through that.
Right.
You know, like this is a really solid, narrow 20-foot pass. Like, you're good.
Well, so what you and I were talking about in with day one, there was a moment where I said, did the Persians use a phalanx as well? And apparently, from what I gathered from like some further reading, no. Apparently, what it was like there would be a dude with a shield, and then there would be a archer next to them. So like the dude with the shield would like protect the archer while he was shooting, and then they would like move forward together. So it was more of like a kind of like doubles, like battle buds going forward.
Yes. And but it's interesting because it's like, I think you have to have the context of how they developed it in two ways. One is that they developed it against those Scythians and all the people on the steppe that were just like nuts on their horses. And so like their archers had to get closer, I think, than archers normally do. And like, that's fucked up. Like, you're an archer and like there's a guy with a horse that like has a severed head, probably like just hanging out on their horse, and they're shooting at you and you're like, like, I hope your wicker shield can stop this horse from running me over, and just like pulling back on your bowstring.
Dude, I have something really fun to talk about. When we talk about the feigned retreat, I watched the 300 Spartans that was made in the 60s.
Oh, nice.
I think 67. And there's a really hilarious little, they kind of do a similar thing to the feigned retreat. And I watched, I was like, you know what? Good for them for pulling this off. And then like that long ago as like a film, like a stunt. Yep. I was like, this is tight. And I'll talk about it once we get a little bit more into it. But
and I think the other thing with the Persian army is that they used like a decimal system. So like they essentially used decimals and order of magnitudes to construct their armies, which I thought was really interesting. So it's like, I'm going to have 10 of these or 100 of these or 1,000 of these, like order of magnitudes, or like 50 of them. So like they just use really round, even numbers. And because of that, they would like have like similar sized groups. And so then like, okay, I'm going to have 50 or 100 of these light infantry guys. So I also have 50 or 100 of these archers. So I can just pair those together, and then that becomes a block.
Really?
Yeah, so they actually had like a pretty legit and fairly sophisticated, against any other group besides the Spartans, I think, would be very sophisticated military structure. Because they have people that they have commanders up and down the different decimals. So like every, let's say 100 people, you would have a commander. Then every 1,000 people, you'd have a different commander. So you had like this order to their system that was like, again, talking about Darius, and like he was just like this crazy mathematician guy. Like, I think that tracks for me in my mind of like how their army was able to do the things it did.
I mean, that makes sense, especially when you said you were talking about like the war of attrition. Like, you're going to notice that this really does come down to a numbers game.
Yeah.
Like, really it does, is the way that this ends. It's not like who's stronger, who's braver. It's going to be like who has more.
Yeah.
And that's really what it comes down to. All right, man. Are you ready to get into day 2?
Let's do it. My only notes for today is don't forget the flutes. So I wrote that down.
Don't forget the flutes. Yeah, you started off with that. That was right out the gate. As the sun rose the next day on the battlefield of Thermopylae, King Leonidas awoke with one mission in mind: sacrifice the next female goat and ask the seer if conditions were favorable for battle. The king made the sacrifice, and the seer inspected the organs of the goat and foretold that indeed this was a glorious day for continuing the war at the hot gates. Xerxes must have thought so as well, since he was already seated on his golden throne to look down on the action from a safe distance yet again. Xerxes' emotions were still raging from the fact that this battle is lasting longer than a day, and decided to order early action from second-ranked units. These were considered his subpar fighting force, which we now call today cannon fodder. This tactic is a puzzling one for historians and casual observers alike. Xerxes must have pushed forward his high number, less important men on a day 2 in order to inflict early exhaustion so that fighting later in the day would be more difficult for the Spartans, as the outnumbering would be as high as 28-1. The same strategy is being used here as day 1, but with a special twist. Xerxes read a proclamation to the men that he was observing the assault on the Phocian wall, and had servants writing down the men who were fighting well. He assured the men who would survive and breach the wall that they would be spoiled with luxury and wealth. Retreating would also be impossible, because this time, during the assault, a bunch of men with spears would follow and were ordered to kill any Persian who retreated and ran in the opposite direction of the Spartans. Did you ever see that movie? It's with Jude Law, man.
Enemy at the Gate?
Yeah.
Ooh, I was just thinking of that movie.
Were you?
Yeah.
Okay,
Absolutely.
so I remember watching that like as a wee young lad with my brother, and like in the very beginning, is it the Germans or the Russians that
Russians.
are the Russians are shooting their own people who are retreating, and we were like, yeah, that's dumb. Like you're shooting your own people. I would have been like grabbed a gun from the other side and be like, you know what, they're shooting at me, so maybe I'm on your side.
Right.
Like that's really a really intense way to persuade someone to fight for you. Is like, we will kill you.
I remember I asked my brother who was older, and I was like, what? And he's like, yeah, and they end up winning. Like that's why they win that. Like that's why they win that war, is because that's what was at stake. Damn.
Yeah. So I mean that's where we also have to think too, right? So if the fact that we made it to day 2, Xerxes is already pissed off, so he's like, fuck it. You retreat, you're dead.
Yeah, well then it becomes like this whole, I think there's one, like how accurate is this, because I don't have any examples from the Persian military histories I was reading through that they did this in other battles. So like maybe this is Herodotus trying to like vilify Xerxes.
That's a good point.
But it could absolutely also be a thing, especially if you think about like maybe it's their hostage conscripts that are from the other countries that they've like, maybe it's like, I don't know, some like North African like Egypt or Egypt adjacent place that just tried to revolt, and they were like, we already are mad at you guys, and so like you guys go and die one way or the other, like we were already going to kill you, so it's fine.
Right. Well, I mean, just by the fact that we were sitting here talking about the Enemy at the Gates takes place in World War II, right?
Yeah.
So that happened in relative like modernity, like that.
Right, so it is a thing apparently,
dude. So like I think that it is a thing. I guess that really goes into the idea that like this would be under the like a dictatorship type scenario where it's like you don't get to make choices.
Right.
And if you do try to make your own choice by surviving, you die.
Right.
So you might as well just follow my rules and orders.
But then too, what you're saying about Xerxes, like writing things down, and like I think one thing that when we vilify in like the movie 300 Xerxes, we miss like the awesomeness of ancient Persia, which is that they can't lie.
Right.
They have no concept of lying, and like they're like, we don't do it. You Greeks are weird because you do. And so if he's saying I'm writing things down because I'm going to give favors to people that do well, like he absolutely will. They will become nobility or something. They will get concubines. Like something crazy is going to happen to these people.
Dude, yeah, thank you for bringing that up, because Dan Carlin goes into that a little bit as well. The whole, this is a culture that can't lie.
Yeah, he says something like Persian men they're taught how to like wage war, like, and be honest. Like,
right, but it's legit.
Yeah,
it's a bunch of Jim Carreys from Liar Liar running around. I can't lie.
I love it. I've been really playing with like, do I change my whole parenting strategies and now teach my son not to lie? And my wife's been like reminding me that like, that sounds great, but will he be successful in American culture? And I don't think he would. Like, you have to have some sort of deception built into our society to some degree, right? Like,
Dude, have you seen Interstellar?
I love Interstellar.
Okay, so remember when TARS is the robot's name,
Yeah.
right? Remember when he's like, "Why is your honesty level at 70% or whatever?" And he was like, telling the truth all the time is not like socially acceptable."
Right.
That's like, you know what I mean? Like, you would obviously be able to know more about this than I am, but like, I imagine that's kind of like almost being on the spectrum. Like, people who don't have like the social capability to be like, "Oh, this is a moment where if somebody asks me if they look good, but they really don't, I'm not like, you look hideous." Right? Like,
It is great working with people that they're on the Asperger spectrum, because, and maybe that's why I'm so okay with my son speaking nothing but the truth, because I really appreciate the honest. It does take a little bit to get used to, like, the horrible things they'll say to you, but yeah, like John Mulaney says, like, my hips are a little feminine. That is the thing I'm sensitive about. You jerk.
do you think in the past, like, they would meet somebody and like if they were super honest, like, "Oh man, maybe he's on the spectrum"? Like, no, he's Persian.
Yeah, right? I was thinking it'd be great if it was like that Cyrus or one of those like early ancient Persians was on the spectrum, and he's like, no, everybody has to tell the truth.
We all. I don't want to be different.
That's what we do now. And then that just, like, I would love that. That'd be great.
Man, I'm really wondering socially how that went with like people having to. It's like deeply embedded in your culture. Like, we have to tell the truth. That's just so interesting to me.
Yeah, well, because one of the things that Dan Carlin points out that I thought was lovely was that they don't have like bazaars. Like, there's no like market system, because the whole idea of haggling or setting a price is dishonest.
For sure.
Like, dang.
Yeah,
So it falls apart immediately in capitalism, which is crazy. And I think that there are issues with Xerxes and ancient Persia and the Medes and all that. But as far as dictator goes, there have recently been worse ones than that. Like,
At least he's honest.
right? I was like, that means more to me than I thought. Like, he's terrible and he flays people alive and he does the boats and he puts people on the rack. Like, he also tells the truth, which is kind of cool.
It's pretty admirable. Yeah, pretty sure there's a whole like commandment about it, right?
Right?
Yeah.
That doesn't matter. That's not the
That
commandment
means
that matters.
nothing. This strategy did the opposite of motivating the Persian army. They failed quicker than they did on day one against the Spartan wall. Leonidas took the opportunity to fight Xerxes' less experienced men with a strategy called the feigned retreat, which is extremely hard to pull off and can only be done by the most disciplined of regiments. A feigned retreat is when a military force pretends to retreat and lures an enemy into a closer position of vulnerability. The Spartans formed a phalanx in front of the wall from some Spartans waiting behind for the feigned retreat. Xerxes' pawns charged forward and the Spartan phalanx in the front pretended to run away in fear, where really they just met the Spartans waiting behind them and fell back in formation of the phalanx. The momentum of the Persians sprinting towards a perceived frightened Spartan herd was only met with a strong and steady phalanx with spears aimed and ready for carnage. So that's pretty dope.
Yeah, and I was thinking, like, you don't really appreciate this until you understand that, remembering from day one that they are farmers. Like, these are not professional armies. This isn't Spencer being an enlisted Marine. This is just like a dude who has some slaves and he has a wife, and he's like, I don't know, I assume growing wheat and walking in the wheat like
Right.
a gladiator. And then seasonally, or every 2 seasons, they get called to go to war and they don their father's armor and they do it. And that most of the other city-states, that's to the extent of it. They're like, all right, going to war. You know, we're going to go fight at this other city-state or something. And then that's it. But like, it seems like the Spartans, either right now or very soon after all these events, while they're walking, they're playing these like sick double fisted flute,
Double fisted.
and they're drilling while they're marching. So like that small act is like giving them this crazy ability that no one else can do. Which
Discipline, yeah.
Yeah, they have. Well, and they have smaller commanders. They have. I don't know what you call it when you have like. Is there a term for the officer of just a small section of a group, like a platoon?
Squad leader.
Squad leader, yeah, it's like a squad leader. Or I was trying to think of what's on the submarine, the enlisted guy who's the XO. No, not the XO. Damn, I don't know.
The chief.
Chief, yeah. And like they are right there, and so like they're not like the highest. They're not Leonidas, but they can also deliver communication to a smaller section of group. So it could be like, because I would never trust like a bunch of farmers or like I'm trying to think like my job, like we're a bunch of teachers and we have to seasonally go to war. I'm not gonna be like if one of the teachers are like, all right, we're gonna do a feigned retreat. Like, dude, we have not practiced the feigned retreat. I'm not doing it. I'm not gonna pretend to run away and then hope you know when to turn around. But if we were walking several days with flutes playing and we practice in step to the flutes, this exact thing.
Right. So you're talking about like just reverting to your training.
Yeah.
Dude, absolutely, dude. Like it kind of reminds me of, you remember that episode of The Office where Dwight tries to do a fire drill?
Yes, this is like the best opening.
Right. And so it kind of reminds me of that. Is like all these like everyday common folk, right? When you do drills once every blue moon, it's a disaster. And these people are like, oh, Tide, I actually get to use my training that I've been doing since I was 7 or 8 or whatever. And the point that you and I are trying to make is that this feigned retreat thing is like, you got to be in line, sharp, and good to go in order to pull this off, because it's a bunch of people running away, pretending to be scared, and then you got to get right back in line of a phalanx for the people that are charging at you thinking that you're running away. Right. So it's pretty brilliant. In the 300 Spartans, the 60s movie, they kind of do this. What it is like, it shows them all online, and the cavalry shows up with the horses, and Leonidas is like doing one of those moments where he's like, hold, and they're like charging. He's like, hold, and they get closer, and then like finally when they're like, you know, several feet away, he's like, now, and they all drop and like hide under their shields, and the horses jump over the shields, and then they like, as the horses are like around, they stand up, and then they throw spears at them like turning around. I was like, that's dope. Yeah, that's cool. Pretty fun. That's like a cool little Hollywood version of the feigned retreat.
You know, I'm looking at like the phalanx, and it's terrifying because the phalanx is only powerful because the front line is so strong. Like that's the only reason why it works, is that they form like this legitimate, like actual line in the front, and then so like a head-on collision is where they're strongest, and so to give that up is like removing their only strength because like they're so vulnerable. I'm reading through all the phalanx versions that you sent me, and they are clearly vulnerable to any sort of cavalry flank of any kind, archery or a charge, which I don't think is really a thing yet, but like at least archery ones would they would still wreck them. Even light infantry L-shaped flanks would just wreck them.
Yep.
And so their one strength they give up, like the balls to do that. Like, and then I'm trying to think like, how do they do it? Like, did they all turn around, or did they do like, because the phalanx has, when they start mixing in light infantry, where they go through the middle to do the retreat, like were they doing something like that? Like everyone's standing there and then the front lines are going down the middle retreating? That would be ballsy too, and that could be pretty cool. Because they use something like that in Plataea when they start relocating on their last day of battling, which is kind of cool.
That is cool. Do you got to do some research on Plataea?
Just a little bit, just to try to see like if there was any commonality to like understand that. And they do like a big retreat in Plataea, because they wanted to move the battle site essentially.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, dude, going through all of this stuff and like learning about Marathon and Plataea and Artemisium and all that, I was like, we're gonna need to come back to some of this. Like,
I want to come back to the naval battle.
100%.
We're not clear, listeners, on the exact pronunciation, so we're calling it the Battle of Salami. if you know the correct pronunciation, please don't tell us, because when I read it, I just say salami. in my head.
Salami's way more fun.
And there's so much death at salami. There's so much. The ocean became red at salami. I just really enjoy it. So don't ruin that for me, dear listener.
I recently watched the sequel to 300.
Did you watch it?
I did.
Okay.
It's on the Max of HBO, and it takes place concurrently with 300. So, like, it's about Themistocles and all the naval battles that are happening during Thermopylae. And if you've done as much research as you and I have been doing for the last, month or so,
Yeah.
it's great. Because you're like, oh, look, there's all the ships that Xerxes used as, like, a bridge. When they show that in the movie.
Oh, that's cool.
They show Xerxes becoming... Like, they showed Darius and him getting shot by Themistocles in, like, the Battle of Marathon, I believe, and all that stuff. Like, it's cool. It's really cool. It's definitely not as, like, well done as, like,
Right.
Some Zack Snyder stuff, but it was great. And then the ending credits are Black Sabbath's War Pigs, and I was
That's
like,
cool.
this is fun.
That's cool.
Yeah, dude. So,
What Spencer is talking about with the boat thing, because there is a technical ocean between Asia and Europe, and Xerxes, what Darius had developed and what Xerxes finished over that decade was a way to cross it by land, which was nuts. Like, and the best part of the whole story is that one of the boats fails on the first attempt, and they execute the guys the engineers, and then they punish the ocean. They whip it.
stupid ocean.
You will submit to Xerxes.
Bro, and then, after they do that to the ocean, isn't there, a straight-up storm that, ruins it? Like, that happens, I believe, multiple times, where...
There are lots of storms.
Yeah.
But no, I think they cross right after that.
Oh, okay.
The storm, I think one of the storms that evens out, because I think, I may not be remembering this right. I'm pretty sure during Thermopylae, what we would call Greeks are losing the naval battles, but it gets evened out because of the storms at the same time that are just randomly killing and murking Persians.
One of the Greek gods was on their side.
It could be.
They killed enough goats to figure out the proper amount of weather pattern. I don't know.
Who knows?
But the point being was, there's so many other things going on during this time period that's not just Thermopylae that are fascinating, and I'd like to revisit.
Yeah, absolutely. Even just all the wars between... I didn't realize how much Athens and Sparta just hated each other.
Dude. So that's what I remember. I showed you one of the books that I listened to prep for this was about the war between Athens and Sparta and a lot of their tactics, and it goes into sieges, horses, and all these different things. And yeah, that is super intense. All these city-states going to war with each other. You and I were talking about this, how much Greek history reminds us of modern time United States having such polarizing ideas.
Right.
It's really interesting.
If there weren't guns or nuclear bombs, would we just be seasonally fighting neighboring states?
Right.
And they're over moral quandaries too. Sparta's you can't have a direct democracy. That's stupid. And so then they go and fight them for it. And you're fighting them over a government ideal, and Persia meanwhile is we don't care what your government is. That's kind of cool. They don't give a shit. You can have any government you want. I'll just put a sand trap in there and we're all good. And
You'll have more land, as a matter of fact.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I'll give you the other guy.
Yeah. Oh man.
And Sparta's government system's super confusing because they sound like a dictatorship.
Yeah, like a super militaristic society.
Yeah, but I think they're more like an oligarchy because they're an oligarchy with two heads because they have two kings at the same time, which I didn't even know was a thing, which maybe shows my ignorance. But I didn't know that any society that ever had two kings where someone thought that was a good idea.
Right.
Hey, you have a big enough ego to be the king, but we're also gonna have somebody else who has a big enough ego to be the king. Like
You guys are gonna get along great.
there's
Gonna
no
love it.
issues ever.
Yeah. What if we had two presidents?
That's what I was thinking. Like, what if Trump and Biden both were?
Wow. Who Twitter would blow up.
Yeah, but I think too that influenced Thermopylae because I'm pretty sure there was an issue on one of those wars, and they had either lost both of their kings because both their kings were out, and so so Sparta had a new rule that was very recent in terms of Thermopylae, which is that one king has to stay in Sparta, so one could go out, and so that's why there weren't two kings out there.
That makes sense.
And Leonidas' lineage is a little goofy to me when I'm trying to understand, because the mythology is so baked in, it goes immediately to Hercules and Zeus. Like, all right, maybe he's related to Hercules and Zeus. Okay, and both. Okay.
Oh, that's funny. No, he's literally the son of a lion. His dad is what's the lion from Lion King?
Mufasa.
Him.
Yeah,
That's his dad.
that is his dad.
Yeah, and his son is Simba, and so on and so forth. Xerxes' army was battered and broken both physically and mentally. Waiting for a resupply from Persian ships to only see the arrival of Greek ships to resupply the Spartans was the last morale defeat the Persian army would see on day 2. Running out of arrows and food made their efforts end early with a crushing blow, and the idea of possible defeat was starting to seem extremely real in the eyes of the King of Kings known as Xerxes. As the Persian army retreated back into camp while the sun fell behind the mountains of Thermopylae, a man came strolling into camp known as Ephialtes. Ephialtes was from the city of Malice, which means that he was intimately familiar with the local geography and the terrain and likely grew up as a shepherd traversing these mountains in Thermopylae. Ephialtes came to the Persian camp with information for Xerxes in exchange for wealth. Xerxes would have undoubtedly been questioning if this was a ruse to ambush some of his men, but felt like he was running out of options. As the sun finally slipped past the mountains and the only remaining light was the campfires, thousands of immortals set out with Ephialtes into the mountains of Calidromos. And so that's essentially day 2. Ephialtes comes up to Xerxes and is like, "I humbly request an audience." And shows them how to get around the back pass of Thermopylae to the east gate. We're currently at the west gate, and there's a pass to get through the east gate. Apparently one of the crazy things about the movie The 300 Spartans, which is like filmed in the 60s or whatever, is that it was all filmed on location.
Oh, that's cool.
So when it shows
They went back in time too
they went
to make sure that the geography was
correct. They went back in time as well. And for some reason, their time machine didn't take them to where the cliff was.
Damn it.
Yeah. So that was weird. But it shows them taking this pass that Ephialtes shows, and it was so narrow that the immortals would have had to been at the most 2x2, funneling through there. So the sheer logistics of just going around this back pass would have been highly difficult.
Yes.
And what it should have been hopefully would have worked its way out. And it was a kind of a huge gamble. Is this going to work or is this not going to work? But again, I think it kind of goes into the idea that Xerxes was kind of running out of options. And a huge part of the book that I read, which goes into all the days, day 2, most of it was talking about the stuff going on out at sea.
Right.
Which is the Persians were really relying on this resupply of arrows and equipment and people and all these different things. And apparently on day 2, that's when the Greeks actually won most of what was going on out there. And so for them to kind of look out at the ocean and be oh, finally the ships are coming, and it's Greek ships. And it shows them kind of resupplying the Spartans was again the last little blow to Xerxes to be you know what? This Ephialtes dude, like, is kind of my only option here.
Yeah. Well, and he also had that exiled Spartan king, which isn't as big of a deal when Spartans always have two kings. So all of a sudden, like, because at first I was like, a Spartan king, like, the dictator of the military government was like exiled and was working with Xerxes. Like, that must be a huge blow to them. But if they have two at a time, they're like, that was like 8 kings ago. It's fine. We forgot about him, actually. But he could have, I assume that he would have been like, yeah, this is fine. Like, we do have goat paths to the south. Like, I know that much, but I don't know where they are.
Right.
But I think it would have been crazy, and the geologist that I was reading about, he was doing the math on, because he went out too, and was like tracking it, and then like compared it from his core samples of like how long he thinks, and he's like, it would have taken hours. Like, it would have been horrible and like super scary, like worrying that you're gonna get spotted and stuff. And
Yeah.
it's crazy that they did it. Yeah, I think also that the immortals. I was reading about Persian military history, and the immortals essentially are like, they're like nobility. They're like all officers in some regard. Like, they're all very legit. They're like the Spartites, like, except for there's way more of them. Like,
Yeah.
so that's
Officers.
cool. Yeah.
It's just like an army of officers
Yeah.
who
Yeah.
are well trained and badass. Yeah, that's dope. Yeah, it's because like one of I don't remember who said it. It could have been Dan Carlin, but when he's talking about the Persian army, he's like, you can't really call it the Persian army because it's made up of so many different like ethnicities, cultures, people
Right.
from different parts of the planet. But because Persia was an empire, they were like, no, it's the Persian army. And it's
Right.
like, okay, well.
Yeah, and so like the immortals are like their core, like they're essentially all Persians, which is also confusing for us because like, as far as I know, it's not as common in this time period for like a Spartan king to have like 300 concubines and to have like 800 male heirs. Like, that number might be exaggerated, and that might be my Western bias, but like hundreds, I know that, like for some of them, and I assume a lot of them became immortals or cavalry equivalent to immortals.
Dope.
Because what else would they do? Like, well, I'm not blue-blooded.
Right.
Kind of. Like, I kind of am, but I'm not pure enough to, like, make a play for the throne, but I don't want to get screwed over. So, like, I might as well...
Yeah, what am I supposed to do?
What am I supposed to do with my life?
Yeah, I'm going to do what my daddy did.
Yeah,
His daddy
exactly.
did. And my daddy's daddy did. Yeah, that's crazy. Any last little tidbits on day 2? Again, I think that's kind of also, that's another, it's like crazy that they lasted up to this point.
Yeah.
Really.
One, because there becomes, like, this... I think when I'm looking at it through my modern gaze, it's like, was Xerxes really worried that he was going to lose? And then I think about the supply issues. And I'm
Yes.
like, yeah, I absolutely now.
Yeah.
As a kid, like 18-year-old, because 18-year-olds know everything, and I miss being 18 because I miss knowing everything. But when I was 18, I was like, he wasn't scared because he had 1 million people. Don't be dumb. But now I'm like, I'm trying to feed 2 humans that are small and myself. And I'm like, oh man, it's more expensive than I thought. And I have to constantly go get bread. I used to be able to keep bread in my refrigerator because I would have it for so long it would get moldy. But now I can't keep the bread long enough for it to get moldy.
Deep.
My small children eat it so fast.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, exactly what you're saying. It's like, I used to live in, the whole world revolved around me where all I had to care about was like my bills and things like this.
Right.
And now like I have 2 kids and a wife, and like how you and I were talking about it earlier, it's like, it's not really about me anymore.
No.
And it's like, I now have to like make choices that will effectively affect my entire family.
Yeah.
Where it's like,
You record your podcast at 10 at night. In the garage.
we will all be asleep when you guys do what you want to do.
So the last thing I wanted to talk about was this idea. So there's this linguistic idea, and they call it... All right, I'll back up. There's a problem in linguistics, especially when you study mythology and like world mythology and linguistics.
Oh, fun.
And that is that there's certain moralities that you can identify, or like certain topics that you can identify in mythology that isn't explained. And so you're like, I don't know what the morality I'm supposed to assume is. And they call it in linguistics either the Lethe effect or the Lethe effect. It's the river that Hades has that you forget everything. And so
Wait, that's not Styx, is it?
it's the river Styx. I mean, the Greek name or whatever is Lethe. Or
Oh,
Lethe.
okay.
I don't know how to pronounce it.
Words.
Again, listeners, don't tell me. I don't want to know. And basically, what they're saying is that we don't have enough information because it was assumed that you would know at the time.
It
And
goes without saying.
It goes without saying.
Okay.
And their example of it that I think is the best example that I've come across to explain to everybody is the original word for God. They eventually started taking out the vowels because everybody knows how to say God, and no one actually knows. And so now we think it's Yahweh, but we don't actually know because it was inappropriate to spell it out all the way. And since everybody knew the correct spelling anyway, you could just spell it YHWH, and that was good enough. And over time, we'd just forgotten the actual vowels that go in between those. And so we're like, it's probably Yahweh, but we don't actually know. Like, no one knows.
Really?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, that's a thing.
I've never heard this.
So there's all these things that I come across when I'm doing this reading where I'm like, this is just Lethe effect. Like, we don't know these things because they're assumed. So, like, Xerxes being nervous that he's going to lose, like, there was an assumption there that Herodotus said that, like, everybody would be like, of course he was nervous about losing. Everyone knows about variable X. Like, the whole audience would catch that immediately. And we don't have that.
This is why, like, the idea of Herodotus is so, like, profound because, like, he was the first person to be like, no, we should write down what happened.
Yeah.
And everyone's like, and then when he did, it was, like, super controversial because people were like, well, my perspective is different.
Right.
So then he got the name, not just the father of history, but the father of lies.
Yeah.
Which is, like, super intense because people were like, well, I was there. I didn't see that shit. You know what I mean?
Well, and then I also, because I love Plato, and Plato is writing things down, but his protagonist, his speaker, is always Socrates, his teacher. And Socrates is adamant that you should never write anything down. And I'm like, this is a crazy, like, it's so radical that his own speaker of his own stories is like, just don't do it. Don't you write this down. And Plato's like in the corner carving it in the stone, like, okay, I promise.
Stop it. It becomes real when you do that. That's interesting, dude. Man, I'm sure there's some amazing conversations that linguists have about this kind of stuff.
Yes.
That's really, really fun.
So, and I think we've identified, like, so, like, the big ones that I can tell from, I'm very new to military history since we started doing this, but we don't know how the actual clashes go in most wars, most ancient wars. Like, we don't know if they actually sprint the whole way,
Right.
or if they stop right before.
Mm-hmm.
I think it varies on culture. Like, I don't know. I have my own opinions, but like, that's clearly a missing piece. And then as far as, like, why you go to war seasonally, like, that doesn't make sense to me. Like,
Seasonal.
like,
Seasonal
everybody's bored.
hatred.
Like, everyone's just, like, walking through their wheat fields in Gladiator, just like, the wheat seems fine. Like, or I guess it wouldn't be right because it's right before harvest season. They go to war.
Let's see. This is August, right?
I think they would all fight before, yeah, because they would fight right before winter, right? And then before winter comes, even up till Roman times, when they're fighting the Gaul, they would stop. Because you can't fight through winter. But if it's like Brooklyn or anywhere else in, like, or even LA, when I lived in LA, the summertime in the heat is going to be your spike in crime. So I'm like, is this just like a human thing where, like, people get hot and, like, I'm really pissed.
That's literally like the beginning of the Robert Rodriguez documentary on Netflix about the Night Stalker or whatever. The documentary starts with, like, this was the hottest summer in LA, dude.
LA sucks when it's hot.
Oh, dude, everywhere sucks when it's hot. Man, that's funny. Because the thing is, right, you can't really imagine walking hundreds and hundreds of, or, you know, thousands upon thousands of people through, like, rain and cold.
Right.
It would have to be somewhat hot.
Yeah.
And people would be less sick, I imagine, right?
When you need your recent harvest, right?
Food.
Because it's the
Yeah.
only going to supply it.
Yeah.
Man. So I guess there's just like all those things. So I'm thinking about that. Like there are assumptions that we don't know. And then there's literary assumptions too. Because a lot of the other evidence we have is based on like poetry competitions, which very upset that poetry competitions aren't like a thing like they were in the time.
Those are rap battles now.
There's rap battles, but it's not as cool. Like it's just like superiority humor. Like tell me why I'm better than you. Like and then that's the battle. But after Thermopylae, it was like whoever writes the best poem about how dope Leonidas is gets $1,000. And then so everyone's writing poems about how dope Leonidas is. And so I think there's assumptions in there about like what's more historical and then what's like an obvious.
Dude, I know exactly what you're talking about too. Because I was either reading or watching something, and they're like, we find out about this in one of these poems, but we lost the first part of the poem, so we only know the ending of the poem. It's like, oh, okay. So yeah.
Yeah, well, all the epitaphs, because a lot of the evidence is epitaphs. No one has seen the epitaphs on these like supposed like lion statues that were in Thermopylae. We have some like Sicilian dudes that were like, yeah, I saw it.
No, they
Sicilian,
exist.
And my Sicilian family, if they said that, I'd be like, okay, I'll take that with a huge grain of salt.
I got a guy.
Yeah,
I got a guy.
I'm pretty sure it said this.
Oh, man. Yeah. Yeah. I guess the whole point is that a lot of this is really just like, this is what we think we know.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, but and for those of you who are well, what's the point of discussing it? It's like, well, that's kind of like most history, to be honest. Like we were saying in the beginning, like this is like recall. Even when you're telling a story from like a month ago, it's different.
It's totally different.
Yeah, dude. As time goes, the stories inflate. They just become different as time progresses. So that's just what history is.
Absolutely. And I don't think to me, it doesn't take away anything. Like, when we go over more modern battles, we're going to see, like, very specific things that are objective. Like, we know this many ships were sunk. But even in modern battles, when we were looking at what naval battle to do next, and I was doing just a little bit of reading, it was like, this battle's still contested about who won. Like, there's still contested things because they're like, I interpret the facts differently. And that's just like that'll never go away. Yeah.
And well, it's also interesting too, because for certain things, specifically, like let's bring up World War II as an example. Like learning about certain battles of World War II, we're going to know way more about now than they would have like the day after D-Day, because the newspaper's not going to be like, here's all the strategies we used and all of this is declassified now, and make sure that the Japanese and Germans get a copy of this so that they know what our strategies are.
Absolutely.
So things come out over time and we're able to learn a little bit more. As they say something about hindsight, and that it's your favorite year.
Yeah.
2020.
When hindsight is Aaron Sorkin's ballpark. Aaron Sorkin's the best hindsight writer in the world. Like, you should have done this. Like, yes, Aaron Sorkin, obviously we should have done this if everyone was passionate about everything all the time. Sure, absolutely.
Shout out to Aaron Sorkin, dude.
Yeah, love that guy.
Me too. As the sun started to rise on the final and third day of battle, King Leonidas once again gathered his last sacrificial goat for the morning prophecy. The seer examined the remains of the goat and saw only one thing for the Spartans: inevitable death. The king would not have been confused for long as he looked up at the mountains of Calidromos and saw the thousands of immortals coming over the pass that led to Thermopylae's east gate. The Spartans would surely be surrounded with nowhere to run. The Phocian citizen soldiers that were guarding the pass that Ephialtes exposed to the immortals would have been ambushed. They would have had time to form into a phalanx for battle without donning their armor, and were met with an immortal army that has bows and arrows, Herodotus recounts that this time the bow and arrow slaughtered the Greeks, making way for an open avenue down into Thermopylae, where the Spartans wait. Though a retreating soldier from the recently defeated phalanx sprinted to Leonidas to give word, the king had already understood what was happening. Leonidas would spend the next hour debating with his fellow allies as to how to defend the east, middle, and west gate. Many commanders ordered their armies to retreat back home since this was now considered impossible to survive. The only allies hanging back would be the Thespians and the Thebans, leaving about 2,000 total Greeks behind, including the 300 Spartans. So this is actually, it was kind of subtle when I read it, but the fact that like when this is all going down and there's still tons of Greeks like starting to realize like we're about to be surrounded, the jig is up. The fact that Leonidas is going around having a conversation with other commanders is huge.
Yeah.
Because it's not like Xerxes where he's like, I'm Mr. Man God and everything that I say goes. You know, this really is kind of showing their like democratic roots, like the democracy of being like, what do you guys think we should do? Like,
right.
where should we set up? Like, I want to hear what your opinion is on this and this and that and the other thing. And really kind of obviously what it ends up boiling down to is Leonidas is like, he even lets people go.
Yeah.
He's like, you guys can go. You know, the Greek ships had come in from day 2 to resupply, and they were still there, and they were like, y'all can hightail it out of here with the rest of the Greek ships. You know, some people need to obviously stay alive. It's completely up to you. But I already, my wife straight up told me like, what is the word, you know, leave or come back with your shield or upon it?
Yeah, Plutarch says it. Plutarch says that his wife said, Spartan shall come home with the shield, carrying it or lying on it.
So he's like, well, I can't come back like a bitch. So
he said, I can't come home.
Right. Not going to be able to do that. So.
Okay. And I have my favorite theory, which is that the reason why he stays in that moment is that this is going back to the music. This is why I wanted to bring up the music at the beginning. Because it all comes back to Dorians. So Dorians, I guess, were the only ones left out of the Battle of Troy. So they were left
Wait,
out.
why?
I don't, because they just didn't show up. I don't
Playing
know.
flutes?
They're just marching, practicing.
Like, we're making up music scales here, all right?
You're the Dorian scale. It's going to be a thing.
I'm telling you, dude. This shit will echo into the future.
So, for whatever reason, they weren't in the Battle of Troy. And it's a big slight to the whole Spartan community. They're very upset because all of the awesome poets and orators that are going around singing awesome songs, playing all their tortoiseshell guitars, they're all playing about the fall of Troy and how epic all these battles were. And they're like, we missed out. And so one theory is that Leonidas is like, I'm about to make a place for the Dorians in in an epic world scale battle.
So just classic FOMO.
He has so
Fear
much FOMO. And
of
like,
missing out.
I love this reading of Leonidas. Who knows if this is even anywhere accurate to what was going on in his mind, but the idea is he's like, the opportunity's here, friends. I'm sick of everyone singing these awesome, like I imagine like the night before, you know, the Athenians were singing another ballad about Troy at the campfire and all the Spartans are sitting pissed. Every night with these songs.
Don't play that fucking song. Change the fucking song.
Every night with this song. It's the same shit.
People are going to get tattoos of us. There will be races about us. People will race all across the... Oh, my God. That's hilarious, dude.
So in my head, that's exactly what happened.
That's funny.
All right, I'm doing it. The Dorians will participate.
Okay. That's a hot take.
Yeah. Well, and then, so in Cicero, one of those epitaphs I was talking about, Cicero supposedly saw one, and he said that it says, "Go tell the Spartans that pass by that we were obedient to the laws."
Right. So this is interpreted different ways, right?
Yes, there's different ways to translate the Greek And I'm not much on translating ancient Greek, and so
So I heard some folks talking about that quote, that go tell the Spartans passerby. This is where, like, I was told, and somebody's going to tell us that I'm saying this wrong, but, like, and maybe you know it, but, like, what is the word for when things get lost in translation? There's, like, it's called, like, Deceptigence or something like that, where, like, you're like, it's like, well, this doesn't really translate to English. Like, they don't have a word for this in English.
I didn't know there was a term for it.
But you know what I'm saying,
Yeah,
though?
absolutely, right.
Like, when you do translations, like...
It's a Bill Murray movie.
It's
It's a Bill Murray movie.
It is a focus feature Bill Murray movie, for sure. But apparently, like, the way that, like, this one historian was talking about it, he's like, a stranger, they're like, that doesn't exist in this culture. So, like, for us to be in America, we're like, go tell a stranger's passerby. And it's like, well, that's not what they meant. There was no strangers in this. So it would have been like, go tell someone, like, passing, just the normal, like, pedestrian would be, like, the right word rather than, like, stranger. But again, I imagine being in a room filled with historians is like being in a room filled with Star Wars fans where it's like,
Actually, I've taken only a couple classes with historians, and they're a good time.
Yeah, soft bodies.
Well, they drink pretty heavily. That's true.
I believe you.
They drink very heavily, but they also, like, can't stand fiction, even historical fiction. I'm like, but I found the essay boring and the story interesting. So, but they want the truth, I guess, those fools.
How dare them?
Well, and then, okay, staying on this, like, who knows the real things and, like, these epitaphs, there's also, this day 3 is, to me, the biggest the biggest branch in the stories, because Herodotus, if I'm correct on this, Herodotus is saying that they get in a pincer on the Colonus Hill at dawn, that column hill or whatever that hill is.
Calidromos or
No, not Calidromos is the pass.
the hill you're talking about. I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
So he's saying, like, on this hill, that's where they make their last stand, and then Leonidas falls early, and then they fight over the body, which is a common Troy thing. Which is what the essay I was reading was like, this is why it's all about the Troy myth, because that happens in the Troy myths all the time about, like, they fight over the bodies, like, of their kings. And I'm like, this
Really?
is cool. Yeah, it's a thing.
Because we're gonna get into that here in a bit.
Yeah.
But that's definitely a thing.
So, like, there's that, but then there's Diodorus, right? So that's the Sicilian that also writes a little bit after Herodotus, and he's saying that they go and try to kill Xerxes at night. And
Really?
it's totally different, and, like, those are the two. And, like, I read a bunch of essays in that book, and everyone just kind of chose one. Like, I think it was the night raid. And then they're like,
Sure.
and they're like, Leonidas got pissed. He's like, they're gonna flank me in the morning, so we're gonna raid their camp tonight. And then it doesn't work.
Yeah, there's just so much we don't really know.
The Lethe effect. Well, that's not really a Lethe effect, but it is weird.
We will never know.
We'll never know.
We do know that Leonidas dies.
My note says they both end with arrows.
That, for sure. At around 11 a.m., Xerxes sent his men forward, who were so reluctant to do so because of the previous 2 days that they were whipped into marching forward. Leonidas set up a phalanx in the middle of the battlefield between the east and west gate. Knowing that he was going to die with his fellow Spartans from the seer making his predictions from the goat that morning meant that the king would try and take down as many people as possible with him. The Persians approached the solid phalanx of the Spartans with King Leonidas leading them in battle songs accompanied by interspersed Persian bodies laying to waste from the days prior. The Persians began to spray the phalanx with suppressing fire as the assault corps of the army began to approach and surrounded the Spartans. As Persians assaulted the phalanx, the Spartans stood their ground and rammed into oncoming assaults, decimating their opponent. After each wave of Persian assaults, the Spartan phalanx slowly got smaller and smaller over time due to the lack of men in comparison to the Persian army. King Leonidas would not have been the last one dead. The story goes that his body was fought over back and forth 4 times, going between the Spartans and the Persians. Finally, after the Spartans became exhausted from holding their armor and trying to keep the body of their king, the Persians successfully acquired the body of the king and let a hail of arrows falling from the sky take care of their remaining Spartans. Xerxes made his trek down to the battlefield once it was deemed safe and ordered his slaves to chop off the head of the king Leonidas and put it on a spike for all the Persians to see as they marched out of Thermopylae victorious.
Damn.
And that's Thermopylae.
That's Thermopylae.
Yeah. So that's pretty, I like really, that's dope of them like fighting over King Leonidas's body. Like that's a cool little scene in my head of like playing that out. But like you're saying, that's apparently just like a poetic thing.
Well, I think it's both. So in the essays I was reading, they were talking about how it's like Troy. Like this is just like a classic, like epic. Like this is what you do in an epic. But this is like a Lethe effect thing. Like this is either an epic thing or this is a legit thing. Because Dan Carlin, when he was talking, especially later on when he was talking about Alexander the Great, he's like, also like when I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking they're so reliant on their immediate officers to lead them that the idea of them dying is like devastating to that platoon in any of these ancient armies. And then I was like, maybe it's not just like an epic thing. Maybe it's like an obvious thing. Like they only are as good as their immediate supervisors. Especially if they are going into battle with such little training. Like if they're training on the way to battle with that group, like they've never been in that platoon before, then they would be completely reliant on the immediate commander to give them commands. And if that guy died, like, well, who cares what we were doing? You know, like let's get that guy because he's probably super charismatic and was able to get them to do things.
So kind of where my mind goes, I know that you are not like a sport watcher at all, really, right?
I enjoy sports, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
So like,
I've watched them before.
okay, cool. So let me give you like an example. Like, you tell me if this tracks.
Let me try to guess the sport. Yeah. This is gonna be good.
Quidditch.
Is it running? Is it running long distances?
So like in basketball, right? Like after like a referee blows the whistle and like the play is dead or whatever, sometimes you'll see a player from the other team just like casually shoot the ball on the defending team's hoop. And even if like it's not the clock is stopped, you'll see the defending team like block the ball to not go in the hoop, even though they wouldn't get a point.
Really?
Yeah. It's kind of like a respect thing. Like, dude, don't shoot that shit at my hoop. Well, like, I'm protecting this shit. And also in hockey, if the clock is stopped and like someone shoots a puck into like a net while like the clock is stopped, that's an immediate fight. Like you're
Really?
Yeah.
You know, I did understand your basketball reference from the Sega Genesis NBA Jam when I was like, oh, so they goaltended.
From downtown. But that's kind of what in my mind where it's like, even if he's dead, it's like, dude, fuck you. Don't take our king, bro.
Yeah.
Like that's my dude. That's my guy.
Yeah, exactly.
I seen him naked, bro.
Yeah.
And they did.
We had sex the night before. It was really nice. Guy Love Thursday went crazy.
Man Love Thursdays. Let's go. I look back on that and I should have made it an alliteration and said Man Love Mondays. Like that's way better.
Man Love Mondays is almost too poetic though.
Man Love Mondays, way better.
It is way better.
Oops.
It really flows off the tongue.
Some M&Ms.
I want to say, I have thought a lot about Man Love Thursday. Since the last time we recorded. I've just been talking to people and asking them their thoughts.
Are you guys familiar?
What do you think about?
Did they get really uncomfortable?
A lot of people did. I was like,
I knew it, dude.
I was like, people get scared and bored and sad when they're deployed. Like, how can we all not get this? Like, everyone needs to be cuddled sometimes. Like, I don't get why this is weird. I want to talk about the broader implications of this. Like, get there faster. Friend.
Everyone's like, I just want to view them as like killing machines sharpening their knives. I don't want to. I don't want to view them like rubbing each other's feet, combing each other's hair. Oh man, oh man, oh man, oh it's so yeah. Like we were saying in the beginning, this really just comes down to they're surrounded, they get tired, they're outnumbered, and it just becomes like they dwindle down to shreds and can't keep holding up their shield for that long.
Well, and even in like, because this is obviously embellished coming from these sources, and even still, it sounds like it went pretty quick, like
right.
Even though it's like they broke their spears and they were biting and fighting.
Right, with their teeth, right?
Yeah,
that is the
like,
thing. Yeah.
Yeah, but like it doesn't sound like it. Time wise, it sounds like it was still over very quickly. It sounds like their spears broke immediately. Like
that's why that last scene in 300 where he's like standing there with like his homies in the phalanx behind him is a really long, drawn out scene because they were like, if we don't put this in slow-mo, this is going to be like a 2-minute scene.
It's over.
But it is pretty intense. Like, I did really appreciate, and they kind of put like the reality of the situation into the viewer's eyes when like Ephialtes is like, bro, like think of your men, bro. Like just surrender. Like just do that. And they're totally on the side of like, I'd rather be dead than be a slave, essentially, and not have like my culture, my freedom. Freedom really is something that that we still to this day kind of like take from them. So like I was really wanting to talk to you about this, right? So like Molan Labe, right?
Right.
Which means smack my melons.
Right. It means I love cantaloupe.
Molan Labe, which means come and get them. Now, Kevin, we live here in Vacaville, and there's a lot of trucks here. Right?
I'm buying an AK just so that I can put Molan Labe on the side of it.
You have a truck.
I love my truck.
I bet you do.
I adore that.
Is it like after you graduate from high school here, they give you a truck instead of a diploma?
No, you can choose. It's one or the other.
Okay. Yeah, most people choose the truck, obviously.
Yeah.
But I feel like this narrative, right, of like, come and take them, has been echoed into American culture of like, you'll see like bumper stickers with guns. It'd be like, don't tread on me and take them. Come and get them. Come and get them. That kind of, that whole narrative.
Well, in that they've literally been using Molan Labe is like for any people that are fans of the Second Amendment, that's fine. I also like shooting guns. But if you are deeply American and you use an ancient Greek slogan,
you better be having sexual relations with men before you scream that.
Non-translated, because people are having it non-translated on their gun, Molan Labe.
Is that a thing?
They're getting it engraved on their guns lately.
Boy.
And I find the irony is like wonderful. Like I really enjoy looking at pictures online of it because you are deeply American and you're doing this as an American thing, but you have ancient Greek things written on it. It's not even Latin, friend.
Okay. So
I don't actually know if that's Latin. I think it's Greek. It's Greek.
So let's talk about, this is kind of what I want to kind of morph this into, like, let's talk about how Thermopylae has morphed into modern day life and things of this nature. So,
because I think, okay, the last thing on Thermopylae was that the biggest question is why did Leonidas stay at the very end?
Right.
And that's the thing that like no one, whatever theory you look at doesn't really make sense except for that he really wanted to die. But like I don't think he wanted to die up until that night before, that dawn. And he's like, probably not getting away anyway, and Athens is already going to get sacked. It's fine. But it's just weird. It's just like a weird thing that he decided to stay.
I think it's just hard for like we as people, humans, more modern people who want to try to live as long as humanly possible. We live in a world filled with like self-help books and things that are going to like, you know, help with longevity. And we even like, especially parents, they're constantly thinking about like, well, now I have to make decisions based on like making sure I'm around for my kid going to college and blah, 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 blah. And this dude had kids and a wife and was still like, nah, I'm gonna chill. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna stay here with my men and fight honorably, which is like, again, I think it kind of just goes into the idea of like how we were talking earlier about the Persians not having a culture of not being able to lie.
Right.
It's the same thing with Spartans where they're like, oh no, bro, I've been doing this since I was like 7 years old. Like we've been learning how to fight and die. I guess perhaps that is the thing, right? They learn how to die, perhaps.
Yeah, a good death.
Yeah.
Cleos, or whatever it's called. Yeah. And I think what's interesting too is, so this is a clear, like objectively clear defeat. Like the phalanx's weak point is being ambushed, that even light infantry can just wreck this heavy infantry unit. And then they get ambushed after a couple days. And I think they're supposed to last for 2 weeks. You know, like, so they got wrecked. And they got wrecked hard. And they had a great plan, and the Persians had a better plan, which was, I'm just going to pay people, and I'm going to be really honest until somebody's like, I'll give you information for money. Because it doesn't sound like in the movies where, like, the villains get killed. Or, you know, like, the guy tries to give them things and, like, here's your reward, and they kill him.
Boom!
Yeah, and, like, the Persians are like, no, here's your reward. Here, how much money did you want? It doesn't matter to me. It's just the thing I have. Like,
see that city over there? That's yours now. Sure.
Yeah, like, because that's much more appetizing, I think, for somebody that's very poor. You're like, Leonidas is actually kind of mean to me sometimes.
Right.
Yeah, but then, so it immediately became propaganda. Like, that was one thing that all the sources I was reading was saying, like, almost immediately propaganda. Like, we are going to use this to immediately influence future battles like Salami and Plataea. And then it keeps continuing. Like, I'm thinking about the most modern one, which is Russian warship, go fuck yourself. Like, that is a clear throwback to Thermopylae. Either it's a conscious move, or it was the collective unconscious of this battle
perhaps
just being here. Like, it's just built into our... But I would imagine that Ukrainian men that are 28 or so watched 300 in high school like we all did. So, like, I don't know. Maybe not.
I think so. It's like, dude, that's another thing that a lot of it's a pretty big talking point for people who studied Thermopylae, that they like to talk about, of all the different military powers and battles in history that people have used Thermopylae as, like, this is like our Thermopylae. Like, I believe even the Nazis did it, right? Like, I don't remember what battle it was in World War II, but they were like, we're just like Leonidas and the 300 Spartans. So it's definitely universal, this whole, fighting till the end. And it's definitely like a romantic thing that human beings love, the whole David and Goliath story. I've constantly been using the idea of that Moneyball movie with, like, the Oakland A's, how they were, like, dirt poor, but were able to get a certain number of wins without having a certain amount of money in the Major League Baseball. And I was like, man, that's a great story. And they didn't even make it to the playoffs. Like, they didn't even, like, win. But it's like, it's so cool though. They won so many games. And it's the same thing with this Spartan thing, where it's like, they didn't win. They didn't win, but they did so well for 3 days, and that's admirable. And look at those abs. Yeah, right.
They didn't do that well.
No, really, in the grand scheme of things, like, it went by pretty quick.
Yeah. So, I was reading about other ones that have referenced it. So, the Maori, when they were getting colonized by the Brits, like, they had a huge thing, and it was like very clear ties to Thermopylae, except for that theirs was more intense because it had the women and children stuck in the fort with them that was getting raided.
Oh, that's
and
horrible.
They're like, you got to get them out, and the women are just like, no, we all die here.
Dang.
Like, Jesus.
Whoa, what year is this, bro?
So it was the Battle of Rengiri in 1863.
Oh, damn.
Yeah.
The 1800s. Okay. Damn. And these women are like, we're all in this together.
It was nuts. Like reading through their testimonies and like the translations of it, they were just like hard as fucking nails. Just like, it's coming and we're not giving in to the Brits. But what was weird about that one that I want to talk about was that the propaganda is so strong for Thermopylae, like that idea being immediately put into like our being over this last 2,000 years, is that the British journalists were the ones that were colorizing the Maori as Leonidas and Thermopylae. Like, it wasn't even the Maori doing it. The Maori were just like, we don't like being colonized right now.
Right.
And the Brits are the ones doing it, and the reporters are like, this is just like Thermopylae. Like, they're such
That's
heroic
cool.
people. Yeah, it's like this really like intense contradiction of
Right.
like globalization.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
That's it. So it's just universally admirable.
Yes.
And it's something that we are all like really drawn to, because I think deep down inside there is a part of us that is all, there's fear in all of us. And we're like, when we look at something like that, we're like, well, I can't do that.
No.
I get scared going to the dentist.
Exactly.
Are you kidding me? Like what I'm thinking about, like, I guess in modern times, what comes to mind for even looking at this like Ukraine stuff with like everything going on, you're like, oh
Yeah.
man, dude. Like when it initially popped off, I know that a lot of us Americans were going to bed being like, I'm gonna wake up to probably some pretty bad news.
Yeah.
And we're like, oh, they're chilling.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Let's go. They got some help, obviously, but another thing that I'm thinking about as far as like modern times, like the Black Hawk Down story, that seems
Yes.
pretty similar with like they didn't win.
No, they did not win that battle.
No, but it was that was very much a story of like no man left behind. That was
Yes.
definitely like a theme in that movie, right? Yeah, man. At the end of the day, it doesn't seem like it seems like war is not going to go away. Dictatorships are going to be chilling for a long time, and there will always be people brave enough to stand up for what's right, or at least try to.
They'll try to. I just find it the other weird thing about like the freedom aspect is that Sparta was literally just at war with Athens because Athens tried to do a democracy, and they were like, you can't have that freedom. You can have
It's a little too much.
you can have our freedom. Oligarchies are cool. Like,
Right.
did no one tell you oligarchies are cool?
I was watching on Disney Plus the Nat Geo little special on ancient Greece, and they were talking about like oh, you know, when we as Americans sit here and we're like, we're basically like Greeks. That's like, look at the White House. It's like Greek. It's like the Athenian like temple, and like look at the Supreme Court. It looks like we're in Athens. And they're like, no, it turns out we're actually nothing like that. It's not real democracy, because like democracy back then was like sacred. Like where like people's decisions they were literally like, this is what I learned, dude. Like people who didn't care about policy and things like that, that's where the word like idiota comes from. Like in
Nice.
Latin, like if you
Yeah.
didn't care about things that were happening, you were called an idiot. And then people that literally just like lived in society and like consumed all of the people's policies but didn't do anything in regards to like helping the policy that's where the word parasite comes from.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's like parasita or parasita or something like that. I'm obviously butchering all of this, but that's where the word parasite comes from. And so like I said, like it's definitely like a sacred thing where like policy and like volunteering and going and listening to all these things where like you were going to go vote on what was going to be affecting everybody was like, that's really what democracy is. Whereas in America, it's like, I'm going to vote for this one guy to make all the decisions for me.
Right, representative. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not really like you get like, again, going into this like whole like come and take them Molan Labe, putting on our bumper stickers thing. It's like, we the people. It's like, yeah.
Yeah.
You get to vote, and that's really most of the power that you have.
Yeah, you get to vote for somebody to make decisions. And that's true, because I was reading through the essay on some of the military tactics of the earlier battles of Marathon. I didn't realize, and Dan Carlin talked about it too, I did not realize direct democracy would mean that you can have votes for generals. And it's so funny to me how dumb it is that they couldn't decide when to go to battle in Marathon because there's like 5 appointed generals that were voted for in Athens leading this big army, and it changes every day. And so like on Sunday, the guy who is the general, he's like, I don't want to go to war. And so then they sit there the whole day, and it's like midnight, and then the Tuesday guy's like, we are going to war right now. Like then they go in charge because that's a direct democracy. Like they vote for these guys, and they all have to share. And so they share it every day. We think. We don't really know. That's the Lethe effect. We're not sure how the sharing worked. It doesn't make any sense to us.
Dude, I also heard that there was on this Greek documentary on Disney Plus, which was pretty solid, by the way. But they were talking about they would have this day where if there was a politician that everyone didn't like, they could go in and everyone would write the person's name on like a little piece of broken clay, and they would like vote. And if they didn't like this one politician, they voted him out. And this dude couldn't come back to town for 10 years. Like, yeah, you're out.
You know,
That's like the original Survivor show. Like, you're voted off the island.
After us ripping on the Molin Labe and then me giving very accurate foreign policy analysis, but then me just remembering that I passed a sign on my way into my house today that had one of the candidates for the district attorney for me to vote for. And
Here?
I realized I didn't know that we were voting for district attorneys this year. That I couldn't tell you who either of them were. So maybe I do like representative democracy where I could be the idiot sometimes. Interesting.
We also, I mean, it doesn't seem like we necessarily live in a time where you're walking down the street and you're like, oh, did you hear that Frank is running? It's like, you should vote for Frank. We also don't have, that's another thing that they talk about in this documentary where they're like, everyone's like, oh, this is such a loved culture and everything was so great back then. It's like, there was also slaves.
Just so many, like, you cannot
Lots.
stress how many slaves.
Lots.
Like, and I didn't understand the functionality of it. Like, it's not just because we like slaves. I'm sure that's a huge part of it. But the other part was like, that was, I think, part of the reason why they went to war. Is like, hey, maybe we can get some more slaves to grow our crops. Or this city-state is a thorn in our side, and so if we get a couple royal slaves, we keep them alive and they're fine, and then they won't go to war with us. And like that becomes like this huge interlocking thing. Like I'm pretty sure that's what Persia was doing. Like that's fascinating to me. Like that kind of leveraging.
Dude, slavery is such a huge like part of history to the point where like human beings don't fathom it, and that's why shows like Ancient Aliens exist. Do you know how the pyramids were made? And they go off on the stars, and then it's like slavery.
Just slavery.
Long periods of time and slavery. It's like, but aliens, and it's like slavery. That was fun.
That was fun.
I definitely submersed myself into ancient Greece for a really long time.
There was a lot there. Turns out a lot of things happened a long time ago.
I wish you could take a picture of this board that we're looking at so people could see it. But Kevin here made started putting strings and Post-it notes on a board, and they're connecting. He's connecting some dots over here, and got maps. And
it worked. I
love
hit a
it.
lot of the points.
I love it. I love it so much.
Because it's been hard for me to understand military tactics in general. Like, I'm used to like watching movies or like Enemy at the Gates or something where it's just like a line.
Yeah,
It's a trench line.
it's chaos. Really,
Yeah.
is the part that we're watching.
Or like in modern battles, like the flanks are like a mile apart, even on land, because they have radios. So it's like it changes the visual. Whereas this one, like they're talking about it, and maybe that's why I find it so useful for me to start with this ancient battle, because these concepts are going to grow and
Right.
they're going to expand, and they're the same chess concepts that we're looking at now in the Ukraine, right? Like it's the same ideas, but they're on a much narrower scale, like 20 feet. 20 feet was making the difference, and Xerxes was running mad trying to figure out a solution to 20 feet.
Well, I mean, it's definitely important to like literally just learning about the phalanx and being like, it's super important to like stay within your rank and hold your position and blah blah. And still to this day, kids who get sent to boot camp, one of the first things that you're learning how to do is march and stand in line and do ranks and things like this, and it's all because of that. But yeah, just so people understand where our brain was at, we were like, oh, let's start with Thermopylae, because that's like, you know, sought after in both pop culture, military, and, you know,
Bumper stickers everywhere.
bumper stickers and bros that just want to get out and race, bro.
Yeah, you did the workout that Gerald Butler did to get out of his rom-com belly.
And I did it yesterday, and it sucked.
Yeah.
It sucked. I want to say the last time I did that was probably like 17 years old.
There was no point in my life when I could do that many pull-ups in a day.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
It sucks. It sucks.
I like running slowly over a long period of time.
Me too.
I'm very happy that the Battle of Marathon really highlighted that running kind of slowly over long periods of time is a marketable skill.
The Battle of Marathon was how many? It was like 6 marathons, right? It's like 150 miles.
That he ran.
Yeah. I just it was on that Disney Plus documentary.
Because he runs to Athens.
Sparta, I thought.
Now Sparta's marching to marathon, but Sparta takes their time getting to marathon. This is the other thing that might be within the fall of Troy thing, because Sparta doesn't make it to the Battle of Marathon because they were
a festival.
The festival, the Carnier.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so they're like, we'll be there.
See, there's so many battles, buddy, and we're gonna be here a long time talking about battles. And so you and I are thinking we're gonna be hopping all over the timeline here.
Yeah, I don't think there's a need for...
No. But we're going into World War II next, right?
We're going into my recent obsession, which is the Pacific Theater in World War II.
Dude, the Pacific, and you haven't even watched the Pacific yet.
I'm too scared to.
Yeah, you should be.
I
So like, if you're gonna watch the Pacific, you need to have like an entire glass filled with whiskey. You might want to pick up smoking. Like,
yeah, like a lifelong addiction.
oh, dude, it's intense. It's fucking like Band of Brothers is like Disneyland in compared to watching the
Jimmy
Pacific.
Fallon's on. I was thinking about the whole supply line issues, and like in Band of Brothers, they talk about it. But the problem is that Jimmy Fallon is the solution to their supply line issues.
Is he in that?
Because he has one scene.
How recently did you watch this?
Well, I think it was right before we were recording this. Because Hannah had never seen it. So I was like, oh, we got to watch it. You're going to love it.
Oh, it's great. I just haven't seen it since I was in like high school.
No, I try to rewatch it every couple of years. Like, I got to remember.
Oh, it's good.
That things are intense sometimes.
Dude, watch the Pacific if you like things that are intense sometimes.
Yeah, no, but the whole movie, like the whole show, it's like, oh man, the supply in the winter. It's a winter issue, right? They're in the winter. They're in Europe. They're like trying to invade. They're trying to hold that forest. And they're having huge supply issues. Jimmy Fallon just drives his Jeep down. You boys doing good? I've lost all immersion. Like, I'm surprised he didn't break his laugh. Like, break character right now and start laughing. Like, that's what you do, right?
That's his move on SNL, right?
God.
That smirk he does. I know what you're talking about.
Just ruins all of my favorite SNL bits.
Yeah. So I think our next episode we're gonna talk about things that are happening currently. Just kind of have like a loose fit,
Yeah.
at ease conversation, and then we're gonna get into another battle.
Sounds good.
For those of you who made it this far,
Thank you.
I super appreciate anyone who listened to this. Even if they didn't like it, the fact that they made it this far. It's kind of like when I leave really long voicemails and I'm like at minute 2. thanking the Academy. I'm like, thank you for listening.
This is really nice of you.
Yeah, I appreciate you for making it this far and coming on this journey with us.
It's like, I hope it was at least as enjoyable as reading a Yelp review of like the lunch buffet at a prison.